This is not a drill. In the last 24 hours, a single vote inside the U.S. House of Representatives pushed American democracy into its most dangerous territory in generations, by a margin so thin it almost defies belief. 218 to 217, Congress approved articles of impeachment against Donald Trump. One vote, one lawmaker, one decision separating constitutional order from something far more volatile. What matters is not just that the House voted, it's how it happened. No landslide, no bipartisan wave, just a fractured chamber split down the middle, making a decision that cannot be walked back. This was not a symbolic rebuke. It was the ignition of a constitutional process that now moves on momentum, not intention. Within minutes of the gavel falling, Trump responded exactly as his advisors feared and exactly as his instincts demanded. He denounced the vote as a hoax, a witch hunt, an illegitimate act carried out by enemies of the people. He made one thing unmistakably clear: he will not resign. Not now, not later, not under any circumstances. That defiance is not rhetorical flair. It is a strategic signal. Trump is telling Congress, the courts, and his base that he views this moment not as a legal reckoning, but as a political war. And wars change how rules are followed. Even more revealing than Trump's reaction was the silence that followed from Republican leadership. No immediate statements, no press conferences, no unified talking points. In Washington, silence during a crisis is never accidental. It is calculation. It means power brokers are waiting to see which outcome becomes inevitable before choosing where to stand. And here is the uncomfortable truth. Once impeachment passes the House, events begin to accelerate on their own. The next 72 hours are not procedural filler. They are a pressure chamber. Evidence is being organized. Legal strategies are being finalized. Private conversations, ones the public will never hear, are already shaping what comes next. This moment feels familiar only if you misunderstand it. This is not 2019. This is not 2021, and it is not Watergate. Trump enters this crisis armed with something Nixon never had: a mass political movement, instant communication with tens of millions of followers, and a personal identity fused to the idea of victimhood. The vote did not end anything. It started something far more dangerous. And from this point forward, the system either proves it can still enforce its own limits, or it exposes in real time that those limits no longer hold. If you are waiting for Republican leadership to clearly defend Trump or clearly abandon him, you will be waiting longer than you expect. And that delay is not confusion. It is strategy. In moments of real political danger, power does not rush to microphones. It retreats into rooms without cameras. That is exactly what is happening now. The absence of statements from top Republican figures is the story. Silence in this context is a holding pattern while the balance of risk is recalculated. Public loyalty to Trump has always been easy. Private loyalty is something else entirely. Many commentators are already reaching for the Nixon comparison, but that analogy breaks down almost immediately. Nixon faced a hostile press, a hostile Congress, and eventually a hostile party. Trump faces something far more unstable, a party split between fear of him and fear of surviving him. Nixon never had the ability to speak directly to a mass audience in real time. Trump does, and he uses it as a weapon. Social media changes the rules of accountability. It collapses distance. It bypasses institutions. It allows Trump to frame every procedural step not as law but as persecution. That power makes traditional enforcement mechanisms slower, clumsier, and more fragile than they were in the 1970s. This is why the comparison to Watergate is misleading. Nixon's support eroded quietly, then suddenly. Trump's support hardens under pressure. Every accusation becomes proof of conspiracy. Every investigation becomes validation. The political calculus is inverted, and Republican leaders understand this better than anyone. They are not asking whether Trump is legally vulnerable. They are asking whether opposing him is survivable, because the risk is no longer just losing a primary. It is triggering a civil war inside the party that could last a decade. That is why the next phase does not begin with speeches. It begins with math, Senate math, electoral math, donor math, Power is being measured in margins, not morals. What looks like hesitation is actually triage, because once this moves to the Senate, the question is no longer whether Trump did something wrong. The question becomes far more dangerous. Does the Constitution still have the force to remove a president who refuses to accept its authority? And that is where the real battle begins. To understand how this crisis can actually end, you have to strip away the noise and focus on mechanics, not politics, not rhetoric. Power moves through systems, and the Constitution provides only a few ways to stop a sitting president. Right now, 3 weapons are on the table, each more dangerous than the last. The first is impeachment. That step has already been taken, and it is widely misunderstood. Impeachment is not removal. It is an indictment, a formal accusation that triggers a trial in the Senate. By itself, it changes nothing about who holds power. It simply moves the fight to a chamber where the margins become brutal. Conviction requires 67 senators. That number is not symbolic. It is a wall. Democrats, even with allied independents, fall far short. Removal demands that at least 16 Republican senators vote against a president from their own party. Historically, that kind of defection almost never happens. Party loyalty has proven stronger than constitutional duty twice already in Trump's case. The second weapon is the 25th Amendment, Section 4. On paper, it sounds decisive. If the vice president and a majority of the cabinet declare the president unable to discharge his duties, power transfers immediately. But the catch is fatal. The president can contest the declaration, forcing Congress to vote. To keep him removed, 2/3 of both chambers must agree. That threshold is even higher than impeachment, and there is a deeper problem. This mechanism requires the president's own appointees, people whose careers exist because of him, to turn against him. That is not just political suicide, it is personal annihilation. In reality, the 25th Amendment is a theoretical option, not a practical one, which brings us to the third weapon, the one almost no one wants to say out loud. Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, the Insurrection Clause. It states that anyone who is engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the United States is disqualified from holding federal office. Unlike impeachment, it does not require a Senate trial. Unlike the 25th Amendment, it does not rely on cabinet loyalty. It is, in constitutional terms, self-executing. States have already tested this weapon. Colorado, Maine, others. The Supreme Court stepped in to block those attempts, not because the clause lacks force, but because it questioned who has the authority to enforce it. If Congress formally invokes Section 3, that ambiguity disappears. This is the nuclear option. It bypasses the familiar rituals of impeachment and goes straight to disqualification. It is clean on paper and explosive in reality. Using it would instantly escalate this crisis beyond politics into something closer to constitutional warfare. And that is why it terrifies everyone involved. Because once that door opens, there is no precedent to guide what happens next. What looks like a fight between Congress and Trump is underneath the surface a fight for the future of the Republican Party itself, and that fight is already underway. For years, the GOP has lived with an unresolved contradiction. Trump delivered power judges, tax cuts, deregulation, but at the cost of transforming the party into a personality cult. Many Republicans told themselves they could ride that contradiction indefinitely. The impeachment vote just proved they were wrong. The party is now split into 2 irreconcilable camps. On one side is the establishment wing, senators and donors who never fully trusted Trump but tolerated him because he won elections and kept Democrats out of power. Figures like Mitt Romney, Susan Collins, and Lisa Murkowski represent a faction that still believes in institutions, precedent, and long-term viability. Their fear is not Trump's anger, it is irrelevance. On the other side is the MAGA core, lawmakers whose political identities are inseparable from Trump himself. For them, loyalty is not strategic, it is existential. Breaking with Trump means political extinction. Supporting him even into chaos is the only path that makes sense. That internal fracture is no longer theoretical. The impeachment vote forced every Republican in Congress to choose a side in public. There is no safe middle ground left. Behind the scenes, something even more destabilizing is happening. Money is moving or disappearing. Major conservative donor networks that once bankrolled Republican dominance have gone quiet. Silence from billionaires is not ideological protest. It is a warning. When the checks stop, so does patience. At the same time, private meetings are multiplying. Multiple sources confirm that a group of Republican senators met in a closed-door session with no staff and no records. The topic was not defense, it was contingency. What happens if Trump actually goes to trial in the Senate and evidence emerges that cannot be contained? That question matters because subpoenas are already in motion. Text messages, communications with close allies, potential coordination with individuals facing federal charges. If those materials surface during a Senate trial, the narrative shifts overnight from partisan dispute to criminal exposure. And this is where hesitation turns into fear. The party understands the electoral mass. Tie your future to Trump and lose badly, and the GOP risks being locked out of power for a generation. Abandon him too early and the base revolts. There is no painless exit. This is not unity breaking. This is a party tearing itself apart under the weight of its own survival instinct. And the next phase forces them to confront a question they have avoided for nearly a decade. What happens if Trump is no longer an asset, but a liability they can't outrun? At this stage, nothing is hypothetical. Inside political and legal strategy rooms, the same four scenarios are being mapped again and again. These are not media fantasies. They are contingency plans, and every one of them carries consequences that extend far beyond Donald Trump himself. Scenario 1, Trump survives. This is the most straightforward and the most dangerous outcome. The Senate holds a trial, but fewer than 16 Republican senators defect. Party loyalty holds. Trump is acquitted for the third time. If that happens, Trump does not simply continue. He emerges empowered. His base reads survival as proof of invincibility. Every accusation becomes confirmation that the system tried and failed to destroy him. The 2024 election transforms into a referendum not on governance, but on persecution versus defiance. The long-term damage is profound. It establishes a precedent that a president is effectively immune as long as his party controls enough Senate seats. Accountability becomes optional. Institutions remain on paper, hollow in practice. This is how democracies erode, not in explosions, but in quiet exemptions. Scenario 2, Trump falls. This outcome requires something to break through the noise evidence so undeniable that it collapses. Partisan defenses, leaked communications, financial records, a whistleblower from inside his circle. Whatever it is, it must make continued loyalty more dangerous than abandonment. If that threshold is crossed, Republican senators will not suddenly find courage, they will find self-preservation. Once voters turn, party loyalty dissolves. This is how Richard Nixon's presidency actually ended, not with the Watergate break-in, but when Republican leaders privately told him removal was inevitable. History rarely repeats. Cleanly, but it does rhyme. When protection becomes a liability, power withdraws. Scenario 3, constitutional crisis. This is the scenario no one wants to plan for publicly, but everyone fears privately. Trump is convicted and removed by the Senate, and he refuses to accept the outcome. He declares the trial illegitimate. He claims the vote was rigged. He insists he remains the rightful president. At that point, the question becomes terrifyingly simple. Who enforces removal? The Secret Service, federal law enforcement, the military. The Constitution provides authority, but authority is meaningless without compliance. The country would enter uncharted territory with no precedent to safely guide it out. We have already seen a preview of this logic once. This time, the stakes are far higher. Scenario 4, the backroom exit. This is the scenario most insiders believe is quietly gaining traction. No cameras, no speeches. Senior Republican leaders meet Trump privately and present an offer: resign voluntarily, avoid a Senate conviction, preserve the illusion of control and receive a federal pardon. This is not speculation. It is historical precedent. In 1974, Richard Nixon resigned. 1 month later, Gerald Ford pardoned him. The deal was never officially acknowledged, but it shaped everything that followed. Trump's lawyers understand the danger of a public trial. Evidence does not stay contained. Once it enters the record, it takes on a life of its own. A negotiated exit may be the only way to stop that cascade. Each scenario is plausible. None are clean. And every path forward extracts a cost not just from Trump, but from the system meant to restrain him. This is where the illusion of control finally breaks down. Even if Trump survives a Senate trial or avoids one entirely through a negotiated resignation, his legal exposure does not disappear. In fact, it tightens because the most dangerous threats he faces are not federal. They are state-level prosecutions, and no presidential pardon can touch them. This is the mistake many of Trump's defenders continue to make. They speak as if impeachment is the whole game. It isn't. It's only the visible layer. Beneath it sits a web of criminal investigations that operate outside Washington's political bargaining. In New York, prosecutors have assembled extensive financial records pointing to potential bank fraud, tax evasion, and falsification of business documents. These cases are built on paper trails, not testimony, and paper does not forget. In Georgia, there is recorded evidence of Trump pressuring state officials to find votes. That tape alone removes plausible deniability. These cases move slowly, but they move relentlessly. And unlike Congress, they are not constrained by party loyalty or electoral fear. A federal pardon can erase federal crimes. It cannot erase state indictments. It cannot stop a grand jury. It cannot silence a judge. This reality is already shaping private conversations. Trump's legal team understands that a public Senate trial is not just a political risk. It is a discovery nightmare. Evidence introduced under oath becomes public record. Testimony creates new liabilities. One misstep can trigger cascading consequences across multiple jurisdictions. That is why resignation, even without immunity, becomes attractive. Not because it saves Trump, but because it narrows the battlefield. It trades one overwhelming front for several smaller, more manageable ones. But here is the trap. The more Trump fights publicly, the harder it becomes to negotiate privately. Every defiant post, every incendiary speech, every claim of illegitimacy raises the cost of compromise. The system does not reward escalation forever. At some point, the options collapse into a single question. Does Trump choose political martyrdom or legal survival? And that decision is being forced far faster than he expected. What happens next in Washington will not stay in Washington. This crisis is being watched closely by every major power on the planet, and the consequences are already spreading outward. Behind closed doors, America's allies are alarmed. NATO leaders are asking questions they have not had to ask in generations. If the United States cannot enforce accountability at the highest level of its own government, what does that say about the reliability of its commitments abroad? Alliances are built on credibility, not speeches, and credibility erodes faster than it is rebuilt. At the same time, adversaries are studying this moment with clinical interest. Authoritarian leaders do not see chaos. They see opportunity. Every day the United States is consumed by internal conflict is a day rivals can advance their interests without resistance. Distraction is a strategic weakness, and it is being exploited. Markets are responding accordingly. Volatility is not emotional, it is predictive. Investors move when they sense instability in the rules that govern power. Spikes in alternative assets, sudden shifts in traditional markets, and rising demand for safe havens are signals, not noise. Confidence in American stability is no longer assumed. It is being tested. But the most dangerous consequence is not immediate. It is structural. If Trump survives this confrontation or burns the system down fighting it, the message to the world is unmistakable. Institutions bend to strong men. Accountability is optional if loyalty is strong enough. That lesson does not stay confined to one country. It spreads, infecting democracies already under strain. The international order built after 1945 rests on a fragile assumption that democratic systems correct themselves before they collapse. If that assumption fails here, everything built on top of it begins to crack. trade rules, security alliances, human rights norms. So this is the moment we are in. Not a single presidency in jeopardy, but the credibility of a system that has held for centuries. The House vote is done. The clock is running. Negotiations are happening in rooms the public will never see, and the outcome remains uncertain, which leaves one final question hanging over everything. Are we watching the collapse of the oldest modern democracy, or the last moment it proves it can still save itself?